When people talk about the Dutch aviation industry and aircraft designers, the spotlight usually goes to Anthony Fokker and the successful Fokker airplanes. But the Netherlands had another brilliant designer and aircraft builder, who ended up in obscurity. Sietse Frederik Fritz Willem Koolhoven was born in 1886 in Bloemendal in the Netherlands. He studied in Liège and Antwerp, and in 1907 became a constructor at the Minerva car and motorcycle factory in Antwerp. Initially, his interest was mainly in automotive technology. He was a driver in many racing competitions and rallies. The successes of the first aviators soon aroused a fanatical interest in flying in Fritz Koolhoven. That was where his future would be. He started getting his pilot's license. He had to go to France, because in the Netherlands, there was no opportunity for this at the time. Around 1910, Koolhoven bought his own plane, built by Frenchman René Henriot. This photo was taken in 1935. Koolhoven celebrated the fact that he flew, designed and built airplanes for 25 years. And what you see here is a replica of the Henriot aircraft, in which he learned to fly in 1910. The replica was built especially for this occasion by the factory staff. Koolhoven still worked for the Belgian Minerva company, and he tried to get management to focus, partly, on building aircraft. However, the management was not interested at all. Koolhoven resigned from Minerva and transferred to the newly established Dutch Company of Aviation. This was founded in 1910 by the automobile company, Verwey and Lugard. At the time, located in The Hague. The new company ended up in Soesterberg, the later Soesterberg Airport. Koolhoven became technical leader. He worked together with Henry Wijnmolen, who was appointed chief of the flying school. This was also part of the Dutch Company of Aviation. In the autumn of 1910, Koolhoven and Wijnmolen built the Heatherbird. The Heatherbird was the first aircraft, of Dutch design, to be built in the Netherlands. It flew demonstrations at Soesterberg in 1911. The Dutch Aviation Company went bankrupt at the end of the same year. In the Netherlands, the time was not yet ripe for aircraft construction. So he moved to England, that was more interested in aviation. Koolhoven started as an aircraft designer for British de Purteson. He left this company after just 1 year to take up the same position at the newly established Aerial Department of Armstrong, Whitworth and Company Limited, led by Captain I.F. Fairbairn Crawford. Here Koolhoven created a whole series of designs, both experimental and production-ready, several of which were built in large numbers, for service in the First World War. In June 1917, Koolhoven left Armstrong Whitworth to become chief engineer of the recently formed British Aerial Transport Company Limited. This was a much smaller company than Armstrong Whitworth, and it would focus on building advanced, high-performance fighter aircraft. Here Koolhoven could fully indulge his now sharpened technical genius. His first design here, the FK-23, was technically ahead of its time. At the end of 1918, the first series of 12 was completed. They arrived just too late to be able to play any role in the First World War. After the Treaty of Versailles, the British Aerial Transport Company got in trouble. Military interest in new aircraft completely disappeared, and the market for civil aircraft was flooded with discarded military aircraft. The British Aerial Transport Company demonstrated some of its products and of course the FK-23 fighter, at the 1919 First Aviation Exhibition of Amsterdam. Furthermore, they presented the now finished FK-26, passenger aircraft, and also the FK-28, sports aircraft. All designs by Koolhoven. Although the demonstrations at the exhibition were indeed successful, no assignments followed. The British Aerial Transport Company went bankrupt in 1920. Koolhoven, however, did not wait for that moment. He left at the end of 1919 and returned to the Netherlands. Back home, Koolhoven started at the Spijker Automobile Factory as an advisory engineer. But his heart drew irresistibly to the aviation world, and so he soon became chief engineer of the national aircraft industry, in The Hague. For now, Koolhoven seized his chance and took over the bankrupt company himself. This, including the lease of Hangar C in Rotterdam. That's how he started his own business. He simply called his company Koolhoven Aircraft. In 1934, it was transformed into the public limited company called N.V. Koolhoven Aircraft. In the meantime, the company had grown considerably and employed about 1,000 people. The end came when the Koolhoven factory together with the local airport completely were destroyed by German bombing on May 10, 1940. It was not rebuilt after the war. Fritz Koolhoven eventually passed away in 1946 in Haarlem. In an interview in 1990, Koolhoven's last living son said, "He was an enthusiastic man who was always full of crazy, revolutionary ideas. He earned enough to live well, but he didn't do anything extravagant. He didn't have time for that either, because he was almost always at the factory." In a paper, Projects for the Future, Koolhoven's design for a 100-ton flying boat was presented. Striking here is the installation of the two engines. These are not placed in the cells below or above the wing, as usual, but completely built into the wing. With the theoretical and practical knowledge available at the time, wings became quite large, creating enough space available in the wing to drive the propellers placed fairly far in front of the wing. Koolhoven had opted for extended propeller shafts. And behold, this is precisely the construction tested in the FK-55 fighter aircraft development started in 1936, abandoned in 1938 due to insurmountable technical difficulties. The first Koolhoven design at Armstrong Whitworth was the FK-1 from 1914. The FK-1 was quickly followed by the FK-3 in 1915. More than 500 units of this last machine have been manufactured. In 1916 he was ready for the FK-8, a biplane two-seater reconnaissance aircraft, which proved extremely successful. No fewer than 1,650 examples were built for the Royal Flying Corps, later Royal Air Force. He also designed very experimental models, such as the FK-10 four-plane and the FK-11 polyplane that never was made. FK-29. This was a light commercial aircraft, in fact a slightly modified Koolhoven FK-26. The Koolhoven FK-29 was mainly intended to transport passengers from smaller landing fields to the larger airports, where they could then transfer to a scheduled service. To make it easier to get in and out of the FK-29, the nose of the aircraft, complete with engine, could be folded to the side, as you can clearly see in the photo. Only one copy was built. It is unclear what happened to this plane. A light two-seater sports aircraft with open cockpit and push engine, built as cheaply as possible, typically intended for the aero clubs that were emerging everywhere at the time. Only one copy was built. Koolhoven himself is the only one who has actually flown the plane. The aircraft was eventually bought by the president of the International League of Aviators, Clifford Harmon, who never came to collect the aircraft. Eventually it was demolished for parts. The design of the wing and tail surfaces was later reused for the Koolhoven FK-41. A high-decker with a high and wide fuselage and parasol wing, designed as a fighter reconnaissance aircraft. A mock-up was shown at the 8th Paris Aviation Salon of 1922, where it was a major crowd attraction. However, the first prototype was quite disappointing. It showed to be necessary to largely redesign the aircraft. Fortunately, the second, strongly modified, prototype performed much better on its test flight in mid-1923. FK-33. Shortly after the establishment of KLM, Albert Plesman, its founder, also wanted to start operating night flights. As early as 1919, he informally asked Koolhoven to design the safest possible aircraft for this purpose. The result was the Koolhoven FK-33, the Netherlands' first three-engine passenger plane, which could carry 10 passengers. The only one built served KLM from 1925 to 1927. KLM sold the aircraft in July 1927, as an advertising aircraft that has flown until the 1930s. The engine arrangement was striking. The two outer motors hung under the wing and drove wooden pull propellers. The mid-engine stood high above the wing and drove a wooden thrust propeller. For some reason the engines were completely open, not built into nacelles. FK-34. A three-seater reconnaissance aircraft on floats, based on the FK-31. Koolhoven hoped for an order from the Dutch Naval Aviation Service. If the aircraft performed well during test flights, there was a chance of an order for 9 aircraft. Unfortunately, the aircraft sank twice through the float chassis, which meant that the chance of a Naval Aviation Service order was lost. The only one built was subsequently scrapped. FK-35A two-seater fighter, which could be built as a low-decker or biplane according to the customer's wishes. The craft was shown in 1926 at the Paris Aviation Show. FK-41 business and sports aircraft for 2 passengers, served by KLM. The prototype first flew in 1928, with Hein Schmidt-Kranz as pilot. This is the aircraft where Koolhoven reused the design of the wing and tail section of the FK-30 that never was collected. In the Netherlands the FK-41 never did very well. Only 7 units were sold, all of which were written off before 1940. One of the 7, registered in Denmark, flew the Melbourne race in 1934. In England, the plane became a greater success. Marcel Desader bought a license and started a company where the FK-41 under the name Dolphin was built in reasonable numbers. Desader started by ordering 2 aircraft from Koolhoven, one of which he immediately sold on to an Australian. This aircraft continued to fly there until 1937. Now the 30s when business started picking up. In the fall of 1933, the FK-46 received its maiden flight. An open 2-seater biplane training and sports aircraft. The first prototype was built in wood and fitted with a 115 horsepower Cirrus Hermes engine. The second prototype was a completely different aircraft from a technical point of view. The hull now had a tubular steel frame. If the customer wanted, the open cockpit could be replaced by a long sliding plexiglass roof. The Cirrus engine was also replaced by a Gypsy Major, which could deliver 130 horsepower. In 1934 this improved version was offered to the Dutch National Aviation School, which immediately bought 4. The Koolhoven FK-46 excelled in comfortable flying behavior. The plane was therefore extremely suitable as a first teaching plane. Because of this docile behavior, the FK-46 was soon nicknamed the cow by its pilots. FK-47. Only one copy of the Koolhoven FK-47 was built, according to the wishes of the client. It was a beautifully lined fuselage, with a nice, but not very spectacular performance. The very first flight, to the Dolomites, had to be cancelled due to engine problems. The same problem arose again in 1936. The pilot made an emergency landing and ended up in the Rhineland, occupied by Hitler. After a rigorous interrogation, he and his passenger were deported from Germany under military guard. Fortunately, the plane was released a few days later. FK-48. Twin-engined passenger plane, was built for KLM, and could carry 6 to 8 passengers. The aircraft initially served on domestic lines. On May 24, 1934, Koolhoven's regular pilot, Schmidt-Kranz, made the first flight in the prototype, which received the registration PH-AJX. A month later and was delivered to KLM. Here the plane was nicknamed Ajax. Until 1936 it was used on the Rotterdam-Eindhoven line. After this it was used for a sightseeing flights and as a training plane. It was destroyed during the German bombardment of Rotterdam on May 10, 1940. Koolhoven FK-49 and FK-49E. 2-engine high-decker. A total of 7 were built. 3 for the Dutch Aviation Department, 1 for the Turkish, 1 for the Hungarian and 2 for the Finnish. The plane is specially designed as a photo explorer with a dark room in the hold. The box could of course also be used for cartography, and further as a flying ambulance, paratrooper trainer and transport aircraft. Koolhoven FK-50, FK-50A and FK-50B. A 2-engine high-decker for 8 passengers, with a remarkably high fuselage. It was designed in the winter of 1934 to 1935, for the Swiss company Alpar, which ordered 2 aircraft in 1935. In 1937 one aircraft crashed during a night flight. A new aircraft was ordered from Koolhoven to replace the one that had been lost. This replacement had stronger engines and was given a double tail. It is known as the FK-50A type. Both the FK-50 and the FK-50A type performed well. They remained in service for many years, the FK-50A type, even until 1962. A military version, the FK-50B, was also planned, with a crew of 4 and a permissible bomb load of 1,000 kilograms. This version has never been implemented. Military biplane trainer or scout with 2 open cockpits placed one behind the other. A conventional design, robust, easy to handle, reliable and successful. The aircraft was designed to specifications of the Naval Aviation Service. The first prototype flew in May 1935. A total of 142 units were made. After comparative tests with the British Avro Tudor, the Naval Aviation Service purchased a first series of 10 FK-51 units. An order of 15 pieces followed, and another of 29 pieces. The latter group would be used as a light scout. At the beginning of May 1940, 16 of these were still in service. Most of these aircraft did not survive the German invasion in May 1940. Some were destroyed by air raids, others were destroyed by their own personnel. Some aircraft managed to reach Cherbourg, where the aircrew left them to escape to England. The Dutch Naval Aviation Service was also interested in the FK-51 and bought 17 units, all of which were lost in the Maydays. The East India Line also ordered 60 pieces of FK-51, of which 45 could be delivered before the outbreak of World War II. 33 of these were still flying in 1941. The 20 remaining aircraft in 1942 fought a desperate fight against the Japanese invasion. Many aircraft were shot down, others were destroyed on the ground. Koolhoven FK-52. A 2-person biplane with closed cockpit, reaching to the upper wing, and modern landing gears with Koolhoven styles. The prototype first flew in February 1937. After a magnificent acrobatic flight, the aircraft crashed, killing the pilot. The LVA ordered an investigation. During the demonstration flight, the wings were twisted so much that one broke off. It took until 1938 before the improved aircraft was ready. This was again demonstrated for the Naval Aviation Department, but there was no direct order. Nevertheless, Koolhoven proceeded to production of the plane. That is why for a long time there were 5 unsold FK-52s on Koolhoven's factory grounds. Koolhoven FK-55. A single-decker fighter of striking design. The engine was behind the pilot. And this is why I saved this plane as last subject in this video. Koolhoven FK-56. The Naval Aviation Department was looking for a modern training aircraft for the training of pilots, observers and gunners. At the end of 1937, Koolhoven was presented with the requirements. The prototype made its first flight in February 1938. This had a low-positioned, articulated wing, a fixed undercarriage and a fully covered cockpit. The fuselage was remarkably long to accommodate an observer. The engine was a right whirlwind. A second prototype differed significantly from the first in having a straight, higher wing, and a more modern and further forward cockpit that was only partially closed. The observer sat in the open air. In addition, the landing gear was retractable in large nacelles under the wings. The final model, of which the Naval Aviation Department ordered 20, had further improved landing gear, which was fully retractable into the wing. The FK-56 also had technical problems. During the last takeoff flight, the wing of the first aircraft for the Naval Aviation Department broke. The wing design was of course revised. By May 10, the Naval Aviation Department had received 10 of the 20 aircraft ordered. They were all destroyed by German bombardments that day. Koolhoven FK-58 and FK-58A. During the arms race in the late 1930s, the French government requested Koolhoven to develop a light and modern fighter aircraft. The FK-58 was developed in record time, and the prototype was built 2 months after the design was completed. On July 17, 1938, the aircraft was first flown by test pilot coppers. The prototype was then extensively tested in France, and in November it was shown at the Paris Aviation Show. Afterwards, the aircraft would fly back to the Netherlands. Due to engine trouble, it had to make an emergency landing near Ghent, in Belgium, where it was wrecked. At that time, a second prototype was already being worked on, and preparations were also made to start serial production. Rightly so, in January 1939 France placed an order for 50 aircraft. The Dutch Naval Aviation Department also showed interest in the FK-58. 36 aircraft were ordered just before the outbreak of the Second World War. 10 aircraft were destroyed on May 10, and Koolhoven was never able to finish the rest of the Dutch order, as the factory was in ruins. And here we are back, with the Koolhoven FK-55. I saved this for last because this is Frederick Koolhoven's most revolutionary design. It was way ahead of its time, and this did not stay unnoticed by other manufacturers. The engine was behind the pilot, in the center of the fuselage. The machine was equipped with 2 counter-rotating propellers, which were driven by extended propeller shafts. To further complicate matters, an onboard gun was also provided, firing through the hollow propeller shaft. The craft was to be fitted with a retractable undercarriage. Was successfully introduced, as a mock-up, at the Paris Aviation Salon in 1936, but during the further development of the design, Koolhoven ran into insurmountable problems. The center of gravity was unfavorable due to the engine placed far back. The wing was so high in the fuselage that the retractable undercarriage was not feasible in practice. In the end, it was decided to mount a fixed undercarriage, which significantly reduced the performance. The innovative engine placement and the 2-propeller mechanism turned out to be heavier than expected. The aircraft has only flown once. On June 30, 1938, test pilot Thomas Coppers took off, immediately turned the rudder and landed, tailwind. Koolhoven rushed to the aircraft to ask the pilot what was going on. He told him that he would never fly this plane again. The technology was just not ready for such an advanced design, and further development was put on permanent hold. But the story of this fighter plane does not end here. In the USA, aircraft manufacturer Bell also worked on a fighter of this design, the P-39 Air Cobra, which has a striking resemblance with the Koolhoven 55. Bell solved the problems that Koolhoven encountered with the center of gravity and the retractable tricycle landing gear, and improved on the overall design. The Bell P-39 became the P-69 King Cobra, and over 3,000 aircraft of this type were built. I don't know if Bell got the idea from the Koolhoven FK-55, but it does show that the FK-55 was revolutionary for its time. Frederick Willem Koolhoven was a genius Dutch designer and aircraft builder, and he certainly deserves his place in aviation history. I hope you enjoyed this look into Dutch aviation history. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.